Oh, apologies for that. Oh my God, I hope you can hear me now. Apologies for that. Sorry about that. And my microphone, I realized, was on mute. So thanks very much, Gabriel, for mentioning that. So apologies for that. So what I was saying was, if you're yet to join the meetup group, make sure that you join the meetup group because that way you can get informed, you can get notification whenever we're putting together events. And also, yeah, and also, we have a physical meetup that we are setting up later this year in November in Lagos, Nigeria. So if you want to be notified for that event, make sure you join the meetup link that I've put in the chat window. And the other thing that I want to point out to you is that we do have a Medium publication where we post information relating to AWS announcements in West Africa, relating to maybe some technical information, some practice information. So we always put those information in the community's Medium publication. So I'll link also in the chat window. But also make sure you follow the community's Medium publication. Oh, okay. As this says, we can't. Can you hear me now? I believe that you should be able to hear me now. So if you just confirm that, awesome, yeah. So again, just make sure that you follow the community's Medium publication, so that way you get notified whenever we put out any new blog post or anything relating to that. So what exactly are we going to be doing today? So we've been going through the AWS security specialty exam objectives. The different areas of the exam objectives. So you have IAM, Identity and Access Management. We have infrastructure security. We have logging and monitoring. You have logging and monitoring. You have incident response. And you have data security. So that way we have 5 main objectives to make sure that we are familiar with before we do this exam. So what we've been doing in the past few days, we've been going through some practice exam questions, and we'll still carry on doing that. However, what I want to do today is I want to give some basic information around logging and monitoring, especially around 2 AWS services, which we have CloudTrail and we have CloudWatch or CloudWatch and CloudLogs, and services like SNS. And I'm going to be sharing some information about these in our time together today. And then depending on if we have some time left, what we'll do is that we can spend the rest of the time doing some exam practice questions. So some exam practice questions. So that's the plan for today. And as we go through, make sure you put your questions in the chat window and I'll try to get to them. So I can see Gabriel has a question. Gabriel said, where can we watch the other series? And the other days for the series are just joined. So good question, Gabriel. So the YouTube channel that you're currently watching, if you're watching from YouTube, the YouTube channel that you're currently watching us from is the community's YouTube channel. So all the videos of the previous days of the previous sessions are recorded and they're posted on the YouTube channel. So also I'll encourage, if you're yet to subscribe to the YouTube channel, make sure you do so. And also, if you're watching the video, make sure you like the video. That always helps. It encourages the people that are, dedicating their time to make sure that the community gets this information. So please, if you're yet to do so, subscribe to the YouTube channel and also like the video if you're getting something from it. Okay, so let's go and get started with this aspect of logging and monitoring, and let's look at some of the services. And then I'll show you like some demonstration, and then we'll see if we can do some exam practice questions for today. So let's get started. So we're going to get started with this called CloudTrail. So we're going to get started with a service called AWS CloudTrail, and let's get some information about this service. So let's go to that. So apologies, the screen is a bit frozen. So, but let's do that. Here we go. Okay, so let's get some information about CloudTrail. So first of all, when we are talking about logging and monitoring in AWS, one of the services that we need to be familiar with when it comes to this certification exam is the CloudTrail service. We need to be familiar with this service. What is the service? How does it work? How do we troubleshoot it? You will get questions relating to this service in the exam. So what exactly is CloudTrail? CloudTrail is a web service in AWS that can record AWS API events. What it's talking about is you want to get information about who performed this operation. What did they do? When did they do what they did? If you want to get those types of information, you get that information from a service in AWS called AWS CloudTrail. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about events. And when we're referring to actions that people are performing via the AWS Management Console, via the AWS CLI, or via the AWS SDKs. So that's what we're talking about here. So how often does CloudTrail log information? How often does it log information? So log files in CloudTrail, they are published about every 5 minutes. So they are published multiple times within the hour, but they're published about every 5 minutes. So this is the visual representation of what we're talking about. We have AWS APIs, which could be just management APIs or service APIs in AWS. You have users and applications that are using different methods to interact with those APIs. So whether that's through the management console, through the CLI, through the SDK if you're a developer, through the API client if you're using some security tooling, you're interacting with the AWS APIs. Those interactions can be recorded. So we have the record, they can be recorded, and they're recorded into a CloudTrail. And CloudTrail is going to record the events of what is going on. So that's a simple form of what CloudTrail does. But when we're talking about CloudTrail, if you're planning to do the exam, keep this in mind. CloudTrail has different types of events. It actually has 3 types of events. So the first type of event that CloudTrail has is an event type called management events. So management event refers to operations that are performed on AWS resources. What is that talking about? So that's what's going on in some cases that's referred to as the control plane of AWS. The control plane of AWS. The analogy that I usually use to describe this is to say, if I give you the key to come into the room that I'm in, inside a room at the moment, if I give you the key to come to the room that I'm in, you can use that key to come into the room and you can move things around in the room. Maybe I have a chair in this location, you move that chair to this other location. All what you're doing, that is management event. That is control plane events, right? So that's what you call control plane event. So interacting with AWS resources. So for example, you go to the AWS Management Console, you create an S3 bucket. You delete an S3 bucket. You create an EC2 instance. You create a DynamoDB table. All those are management operations. And all those are recorded as management events in CloudTrail. Management events in AWS CloudTrail, they are logged by default and they are kept for 90 days. So keep this in mind if you're planning to do the exam. They are kept for 90 days. So what that means is that if you go to the AWS console, you can only go as far back as the last 90 days, which is important. So for example, if you get a question saying something like you need to do investigations for what happened 2 years ago, this won't be sufficient because this only keeps record of up to the last 90 days of what happened. But anyways, let's move on. Let's see what else we have. The other type of event that CloudTrail supports is called data events. And data events are resource operations performed on or within a resource. What does that mean? So you take the analogy of the room that I mentioned. I said you come into the room, you're moving things around in the room, that's management event. Let's say within this room, I have a safe within this room. And this safe has its own separate key. If you have the key to come into the room, that does not mean that you have the access to get into the safe. If I give you access to get into the safe by giving you the key to the safe, and you begin to move things around within the safe, that should be called data event. So I hope that makes sense to you. So you have management event, which is you're just interacting with the services themselves, but you're not getting into what is going on within the resource. Whereas data events mean you're actually going within the resource and you're performing operations within the resource. So example of that would be you create and you upload an object in an S3 bucket. If I create the bucket, that's a management event. If I upload an object within the bucket, that's a data event. If I download an object from that bucket, that's a data event. Data events are not logged by default. So again, keep this in mind if you're planning to do the exam. Data events are not logged by default. You have to enable them. You have to create trails to be able to log them. Okay, so let's move on quickly. Then we have insight events, which are the third type of events that we have. So what are insight events? So first of all, let me clean up the screen. Again, as we're going through this, remember to put your questions in the chat window, and we'll be happy to answer your questions in the chat window. Okay, so insight event, what it does. Insight event, what it does is they analyze management events, and they analyze and look for unusual activity and errors in management events. So for example, if we have an unusual number of API write calls. So for example, normally when you're making calls to the AWS APIs, normally you make about 10 calls per second or 10 calls per minute, something like that. But all of a sudden, we begin to see something like 100 calls per minute instead of 10 calls per minute. That is unusual. So once CloudTrail sees that, Insight Event is going to flag that up and say, this is unusual for this account to see 100 API calls made within a minute. So it's going to flag that, right? And that can help you to identify, because that could be a symptom that someone is performing an unauthorized operation within your environment. Another thing that Insight Event can capture is it can capture something like API error rate. So for example, normally you get about 2 errors maybe per day. But all of a sudden, we're seeing 200 errors within a minute. That is unusual within your environment. So why are you getting this unusual number of errors? It could be someone is trying to do fingerprint the environment, is trying to do maybe a recon operation on the environment. Maybe they've compromised the credential and they're trying to find out what can this credential do. So they make a bunch of calls to see, can this credential do that? Can it do that? They get a bunch of error messages. So, but this is going to flag that up and says, hey, there's a lot of error messages that's unusual within your environment. And it's going to flag that up to us. So those are called insight events. Whenever we're working with insight events, just keep this in mind that it can take about 36 hours after you have enabled them before they start functioning. So it could take about 36 hours. Why does it take about 36 hours, David? Because it has to understand what is the normal behavior in your environment. So it takes about 36 hours to learn the normal behavior. Then anything outside that is going to flag it as unusual. Similar to insight event, similar to data event, insight event is not logged by default. So just keep that in mind. So how exactly does AWS CloudTrail, how does it work? So let's get some information about how it works. So first of all, when we're working with AWS CloudTrail, we mentioned earlier, we said management events are automatically logged. So they're logged using the default trail. So management events are logged and they're logged for 90 days. So keep that in mind. We can create additional trails to capture the other different types of events that we talked about. So we want to capture data event, insight event, or we want to capture management event. Also, we can create additional trails to be able to capture that. So we can have a maximum of 5 trails in a region. And whatever event that we're capturing in our trail, we can send the event to an S3 bucket. So typically you send it to an S3 bucket if maybe you want to use another service to analyze the logs. Maybe you want to use another service to inspect the logs. You can send it to Amazon Event Bridge. So typically if you want to integrate with another service, you can use Amazon Event Bridge and send it to that. If you want to do monitoring, maybe you want to monitor the logs. So I'll show you a demonstration of that. So maybe, for example, you want to say, if this event happens, I want you to send out a notification to the security team. So you can use, you can send it to CloudWatch logs, and then that way you can set up monitoring for that. So there are also 2 types of trails that we have in AWS. So we have single region trails and we have multi-region trails. Single region trails, you can only create them using the AWS CLI. You cannot create them using the console. Multi-region trail, you create them using the console. So for example, if I go to my environment, to my AWS environment, if I go to under CloudTrail, and let me show you an example. What happens when I create a trail within the AWS console? So if I go to create trail, you notice it says something right here. It says a trail created in the console is a multi. So when you create a trail in the console, it creates a multi-region trail. If you want to create a single region trail, you have to use AWS CLI to do that. Okay, so now that that makes sense to you, let's go to the rest of our conversation for CloudTrail. Again, remember, if you have any questions, put your questions in the chat window and I'll try to address them. So David, can I convert a single region trail to a multi-region trail? Or can I convert a multi-region trail to a single region trail? The answer to that is yes, you can do that. But you can only do that using AWS CLI. So there is a command in AWS CLI, which is the update trail command. You have to use the update trail command to convert a single region trail to multi-region, or to convert a multi-region trail to a single region trail. So multi-region trail means it's going to log all the activities that are happening in all the different regions. It's going to log a single trail. Single region trail means that every region has its own trail. So that's a single region. So depending on your architecture doing in your organization, the way you're set up, that's what's going to determine whether you want to set up a single region trail or a multi-region trail. Okay. Let's talk about log file validation, because we're talking about the AWS Security Specialty Certification. So we're mainly focusing on security here. Log file integrity is important when we are talking about security investigations. We'll talk about incident response on another day, but log file integrity is important. What does log file integrity mean? It means that I want to be sure that no one is modifying the log records. That's not good if someone is modifying the log records. So someone has compromised the credential of another user. They perform some operations that they should not be performing. But what they are able to do is they're able to wipe that information from the log. So I don't have access to that information anymore. So whenever I'm doing forensic investigation, that information is missing. So I cannot tell what they did. So that is the reason why log file integrity is important. The good thing about CloudTrail is that CloudTrail has a setting that we can use to validate log file integrity. So the way that works is when we are creating a CloudTrail, we can set a setting for log file validation. We set that setting to enabled. And when we set that setting to enabled, what it's going to do is that it's going to get the digest for our log files, and it's going to store those digests in an S3 bucket. And then we can use those digests to validate the log files and make sure that they've not been tampered with. So this is what that looks like. We enable log file validation. It's not only going to store the log files in the S3 bucket, it's also going to store the log digest. What is the content of the log digest? The log digest is a digest file, and it's a SHA-256 hash, which is a signed SHA-256 hash of the log file. So it's going to store the log file, and then it's going to create a hash, and it's going to sign that hash using the private key, And then the whole idea behind it is that we can use that hash using the public key. We can use it to validate, to check that that log has not been tampered with. Keep in mind that if you're using log file validation, if you enable that setting, it does not mean that it's going to automatically do the validation. That's not what it means. All that setting is going to do is to make sure that the digest is going to be stored in S3 bucket. So let me show that to you very quickly in the console. So again, I'll get into some of this when I do another demo. So in this case, I've gone to CloudTrail. And in CloudTrail, if I go to the left-hand side here, if I go to on the dashboard, you can see that by default, it's going to log management activities. So it's going to log management activities by default. And remember, it's going to log them for 90 days. If I want to start logging data event, or I want to start logging insight event, what I can do is I can go to on the trail, and I can go to create a trail. So I can give my trail a name. So let me say David Trail. And this is where I can specify the S3 bucket to log the trail into. So, I told you, I said you can either send the log to an S3 bucket, you can send it to CloudWatch logs, you can send it to event breach. So in this case, I can say I want to send it to an S3 bucket. So it's going to create an S3 bucket. I'll just call this new bucket 0111. Okay. So, and this is the setting that I was showing you, log file validation. If I enable that setting, it's going to make sure that it's not only going to deliver the log file, it's going to deliver the digest also. So, and if I go to next, so this is where I have the different event types that we talked about: management events, data event, insight event, by the type of event that I want to collect. And in this case, I just want to collect data event. And actually, I can go ahead and I can specify data event for a particular service type. If I want to specify whether for S3, for Lambda, for DynamoDB. I can either use the advanced event selector or I can use the basic event selector. So if I use the basic event selector, it just gives me a much more simplified wizard. So I can specify I want to do data login for S3, and I want to log anything that's relating to this S3 buckets on the data plane. So log any data operation for that S3 bucket into this trail. And I can add additional data type or data source if I want to, but in this case, I'll just leave it as that. I'll go to next. Again, this is where I can either connect to a CloudWatch group, or we'll do that later. And I can click on create trail, and I have my trail created. So that's an example of working with some of the things that we've been talking about, including log file validation. So when we do that, so remember that I selected log file validation for that. I'll show you an example of what that looks like, because I have a trail that I created earlier called sensitive bucket trail. And if I go to the S3 where that trail is logged into, I'll show you what that looks like. So if I go to on the S3, so let's go to on the S3 right here, and let's see the buckets that we have. So it's taking its time. And okay, so we have different buckets here. So the bucket that I'm logging the new trail to is that bucket right there. Remember that I called it new bucket 011. But I have a bucket that I created earlier for a different trail. So I can show this to you. If I go into that bucket, show log file validate looks like. If I go into that folder, you'll notice that it's not only logging, creating the log files, it's also creating the digest, right, for the log file. So this is what I can use for the log file to check that it's not been tampered with. And it's going to create a folder for every region when we're doing the digest. So if I select like a region like US East 1, for example, I go into that folder, and this is where I'm going to find the signed hash file for that log. And I can use that to validate that the log has not been tampered with. So hopefully that makes sense to you, because that's an example of what we've been, what I just talked here with log file validation. So quickly, I'll talk about CloudWatch groups very quickly. I'll show you a demonstration, and then we'll see if we can do some practice questions. Okay, so CloudWatch, what is Amazon CloudWatch? Amazon CloudWatch is a monitoring and observability service. So this is a service that we can use to monitor resources in AWS. We can use it to monitor applications. We can use it to monitor custom applications or custom resources, not just AWS resources. So Amazon CloudWatch deals with different types of data. So for example, one of the data that it deals with is a data called metrics. So metrics essentially means health and performance information. So health and performance information is what metrics is talking about. So we are collecting health and performance information from AWS resources, from custom applications. We're putting that into Amazon CloudWatch metrics. And then what we can do is we can analyze those metrics in Amazon CloudWatch. Then we can create alarm to say, if this metrics crosses this threshold, I want you to send an email notification to a group, or I want you to perform some other action. Or we can even use it to trigger an auto-scaling event. If this event crosses this threshold, or if this metric crosses this threshold, I want you to automatically trigger an auto-scaling event. So that is Amazon CloudWatch overview. But let's look at something called Amazon CloudWatch Logs, which is the one that I'll show you in the demonstration. So Amazon CloudWatch Logs, what is it? So it is a service. It's part of Amazon CloudWatch, but we can use it to monitor, to store, and to access log files from EC2 instances, AWS CloudTrail, Route 53, and other sources. So this is important if you're planning to take the exam. You need to understand CloudWatch logs very well. So you can use it to store and access log files and monitor log files not just for CloudTrail, but also for EC2 instances using an agent. So I'll talk about the process to install the agent in a minute. You can also use it to store log files for Route 53, right? So you have your Route 53 logs, and you can bring those directly into CloudWatch log group. So you can loop, and then you can perform operations like you know them. You can create alarms and other types of from that. In terms of the security, log files in CloudWatch logs, the log data is encrypted both in transit and also at rest in CloudWatch logs. So there's encryption end to end. So what can we do with the logs in Amazon CloudWatch logs? What can we do? Number one, we can query them. We can search them. We can analyze them. We can do that using CloudWatch Log Insight, which I'll show you in a minute. So CloudWatch Log Insight allows us to take all these logs in Amazon CloudWatch logs, and then we can run a query against them, and then we can use that to analyze and visualize them. Let me show you an example of that. So for example, earlier I created a trail. So let's go back to CloudTrail. I created a trail that's logging any data event for an S3 bucket. So I did that just a few minutes ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the trail that I created, and I'm going to get that trail to send its logs to CloudWatch, not just to S3. I want to get it to get its logs and store the logs also in CloudWatch. So let's go to do that. So my trail, I called it David Trail. So if I go to that trail, and what I'm going to do is if I go over to, let's do this. So let's go to my trail. And if I scroll down to under CloudWatch logs for my trail, what I'll do is I'll click on edit. And what I'll do is I'll enable and say all the logs that you're collecting, also send it into CloudWatch because I want to monitor. So if I go to enable that, it says, do you have a CloudWatch log group that you want me to send these logs into? I can say create a new one. If I have an existing one, I can select that. But in this case, I'll select a new one. So I'll call this AWS CloudTrail new logs. And I'll say 0111. So that's the log group name. It's going to need access. So CloudTrail is going to need access to be able to write the logs into CloudWatch. So because what we're trying to do here is all the different API calls that are going on in AWS, I'm logging them into CloudTrail. But I want CloudTrail to also write those into CloudWatch. So it's going to need permission. So the way I give it permission is I use a row. I use an IAM row, which we talked about before in previous classes. We use IAM row to give it permission to CloudWatch so that it can write the logs into CloudWatch logs. So that's what this is asking us about. It says, what's the row that I'm going to use? The row needs to give me permission to CloudWatch logs group. So I'll say create a new one, and I'll give it a name. I'll give it a name, and I'll say CloudTrail to CloudWatch row. And it's automatically going to give it the right permissions. If you look at the permission that it's giving it permission to create a log stream, right? So, and to my CloudWatch resource. So it's giving it permission to put log events. So it's going to give it the exact permissions that it needs using that policy document so that it has the right permission. So if I go ahead and I click on Save Changes, what that's going to do is that it's going to start taking the logs that are in CloudTrail. It's going to start sending them into CloudWatch. So it's going to save that change, and I'll show you where we can validate that in a minute. So if I want to validate that, let's go over to CloudWatch now. So if I go over to CloudWatch, and what I'm going to do is in CloudWatch, I'm going to go to the log group that was created. So if I go to under CloudWatch logs, and if I go to under log groups, I should find the log group that was created just now, which is AWS CloudTrail new logs. So I can see that right there. So what I'll do is I'll click on that log group, and I can see the log stream right here. And I can, if I go to the log stream and I click on it, so that allows me to stream the logs. And what I want to do is I want to monitor for the logs and see what activity is going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my S3 bucket that this CloudTrail is logging for. I'm going to go over to that S3 bucket, and I'm going to, let's see. So I'm going to go over to that S3 bucket, and let's go to S3. Come on. So we're going to upload an S3, and I'll see if an event shows up here. So in other words, what I have here is to S3. That's going to log it into CloudTrail, and CloudTrail is going to start to CloudWatch log group, and I should be able to see that in my log stream. So that is what I want to validate now. So let me go upload an object into my S3 bucket. So that is the bucket right there. It's an object. So let's go to upload, add files. And I'll go now that I'll upload. So let's get a sample file. Okay, just uploaded one. And let's go to click on upload. So that's uploaded successfully. Let's close that. Let's upload another one. So let's go to upload again, add files. I'll get another file that I can upload. Let's get that. Let's upload that. So I've uploaded 2 files to that S3 bucket. So that's looking good. So you have to give it a minute. Remember that it can take up to 5 minutes. But eventually, when I come back to this and I refresh this, you're going to see that the logs are now coming through from S3 API to CloudTrail and into CloudWatch. So we'll come back to that, but you're going to see that that's going to be working in a few minutes. Okay, let's go back to the slide. So we can query the log data, what I was talking about. So let me show you an example of querying data. So if I want to query the data, I can use log insights, as I mentioned. So, but because the logs are not coming in yet, I may not see anything. But what I can do is if I go to log insights, you can see sample query that I can use to query that. It has some built-in queries that I can use. So for example, if I go to under CloudTrail, I can say, show me the number of logs by event, apply that sample query. And then what I can do is I can run that sample query against my log group and run that query. And then it's going to give me the information. I can specify the time period and say in the past 12 hours, run the query. But it's currently empty. So again, it's currently empty at the moment. But if I go over here, the events are going to start coming in. And once the event comes in, I'll show you log insight where I can query that. Apart from querying, what can we do, David? We can also implement monitoring, which is where I'm going. So because we can use CloudWatch to monitor CloudTrail logs. So in that way, I can say, if this particular event happens, I want you to send an alert or send an information. So we can use it to monitor logs from EC2 instances. We can use it to monitor logs from CloudTrail. It also has cloud log retention. So by default, logs are kept indefinitely in CloudWatch logs. They never expire. However, we can modify that by modifying the retention policy. And we can set the retention policy between 1 day, and we can keep it up to 10 years. So keep that in mind if you're planning to do the exam. So you can set a retention policy in CloudWatch logs to keep your logs between 1 day to 10 years. So keep that in mind. And we can also use it to log Route 53 DNS queries. So, and finally, before I conclude the demo for today, so we can also install CloudWatch agent on virtual machines to collect log information from them. And we do that using something called the CloudWatch agent. So this agent is supported for Windows operating system. It's supported for Linux operating system, for a lot of Linux distribution, Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, lots of different Linux distribution that support for them. So the whole idea behind this is that CloudWatch logs, it's not just for storing, it's not just for AWS resource logs. It's also for EC2 instances and collecting logs from them. It's also for on-premises virtual machine. So you can install the CloudWatch agent on on-premises virtual machines and use it to collect your logs into CloudWatch logs, where you can do all the things that we talked about. You can query them, you can monitor them, you can set alerts or alarms for them. So what's the process for installing the CloudWatch agent? First of all, you download the CloudWatch agent, whether for Windows or for Linux, you download that. It's a good practice to verify the package signature. So verify that you're downloading the actual executable from AWS, something that's not been tampered with. So you can use the hash to do that validation. Then after that, you can create and modify the agent configuration file. And the very important one, so this part is very important. If you're planning to do the exam, make sure that this part is in your mind. You have to ensure that you grant permissions to that agent to be able to write the logs to CloudWatch. Remember that we had to do that for CloudTrail with using AWS IAM role. So when you're doing that, you can do that using an IAM role, or you can do that using an IAM user. So it depends on whether you're doing it for a virtual machine on premises or an EC2 instance on AWS. For example, if I have an EC2 instance on AWS, I installed the CloudWatch agent on it. What I can do is I can have a role, an IAM role with permissions to write logs to CloudWatch log group. And then I can associate that role to my EC2 instance to give it permission to write to CloudWatch. If I have an on-premises virtual machine and I'm installing the CloudWatch agent on my on-premises virtual machine, in this case, I cannot use a role. What I can do in this case is I can create a user, an IAM user. I can give that user an access key and a secret key. And then I can use that access key and a secret key when I'm configuring my CloudWatch agent so that I have permission to write into Watch. So that's how you do. Let me go ahead and conclude my demonstration so you see what we've been working towards. So here is where we are with my demonstration. I have an S3 bucket that I've uploaded an object to the S3 bucket. I've created a CloudTrail, and I've configured my CloudTrail to log data events for that S3 bucket. So any data event that's happening in that S3 bucket is being logged to that trail. I'm writing all those data events to an S3 bucket. So they're in that CloudTrail S3 bucket. And I also have log validation configured. I also created a log group, and I also have this event that's going to be using that IAM role to write that event into my log group. So that is where I currently am. So let me go validate that the log that's coming here, that the log is showing up here. So I think the log should have showed up by now. So let's go back. So I'll just refresh this. So I can't see anything yet. So, but I think that something is going to come in eventually. So, okay, anyway, I can see two streams here. So let me go to the other stream. So that's looking, yeah, there we go. So you can see that there's logs that's now coming in from here that's showing up in this log stream for my new trail. But I'm seeing that in CloudWatch log group. So that's good. So what I now want to do is I want to configure alerting. So the next one I'll do is I'll go to configure a metric filter in CloudWatch. And I'll use that metric filter to say, I want you to select only events that has to do with somebody uploading objects into S3 or somebody downloading objects from S3. So I'll do that using metric filter. And then I'll create an alarm to say, anytime you see any one of those two events, if somebody uploads or downloads an object in that S3 bucket, I want you to send a notification to an SNS topic, and I'm going to use that to send an email notification that's going to send a notification to the security team. So I need to go conclude this part, and then the other part. So that's the only thing that's outstanding. So I'll try to get that done very quickly. So let's go back to where we are, and let's go to get that done. Okay, so let's go to, again, remember, if you're yet to like this video, make sure you do so. Make sure you also subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're yet to do so. So let's go to my stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm currently in my log group. So let me go back to that log group, and I'm under this log stream right here. So what I'm going to do is if I select, let's go back to log groups. And if I select my log group and I have my log stream here, what I'll do is I'll select my log stream. And if I go to under actions, what I'll do is under actions, I'll go to create a metric filter. So what this allows me to do is I can specify a particular event that I'm interested in. And the events that I'm interested in this case, it's a very simple event. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm interested in the following. Any activity that's coming from S3 where you're uploading objects, so that's the event, it's called put objects, or you're downloading objects where the event is get objects, those are the events that I'm interested in. So I'll put those pattern, I'll put that pattern right there. And then I put those pattern right there. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and now specify my trail. I'll go ahead and test the pattern. And I can see that it's detected two events that matches that. So that's looking good. So I'll go ahead and I'll click next. I'll give the metric filter a name. I'll just call it metric filter. I'll give the metric namespace a name. I'll call it metric namespace. I'll give the metric a name. I'll call it S3 upload, download metric. The metric value, I'll say if it goes above 1. So if you see that log and the count, it goes above 1. So what I want to do is I'll go ahead and let's go to that. I'll go to next and I'll create the metric filter. So the next thing that I'll do once I have the filter now is I'll go to create the alarm. So the alarm is what I'll use to send notification to SNS. So in order to create the alarm, so what I'll do is if I go back to my metric filter, I'll select my filter right there. And if I select my filter, I'll go ahead and I'll create the alarm. So it's going to take me to the window where I can create the alarm for that. And in this case, so when I'm creating the alert, so automatically selected my metric name, and I'll leave everything else at the door. What I want to do is I want to specify a static threshold. I'll say if the value is greater than 1, I want you to raise an alarm. So that's what I'm doing. So I'll go to next. So I'll raise an alarm and I'll use an SNS topic. So what I'll do is I'll create a new SNS topic and I'll call my SNS, I'll call it S3 upload, download topic 0111. So, and I'll send the email where S3 is going to send notification to. So I'll put my email, david@havitcloud.com, and I'll go ahead and I'll create the SNS topic. So once I've done that, it should have sent an email to me. So let me go to my email. Yeah, I just received an email from SNS saying you've been subscribed to a notification. So I'll go ahead and I'll confirm that subscription. So I'll go ahead and I'll click that link in my email. So it's going to validate that subscription. So that's confirmed. So let's go to the next step. So let's go back to CloudWatch. So I'll go to next. I'll give the alarm a name. I'll call it S3 upload, download alarm. And I'll go ahead and I'll go to next. And I'll go ahead and I'll create my alarm. So that's good. Now I have my alarm and everything is all done exactly how I want it to be. So this way, I've also created the metric filter. I've created the alarm, which is going to send notification to an SNS topic, which is going to send an email to my email address. So if I want to test it now, once I upload an object to an S3 bucket, or I download an object from this S3 bucket, if you give it roughly about 5 minutes, remember that CloudTrail and the trails are published roughly every 5 minutes, so keep that in mind. Within about 5 minutes or so, I'll receive a notification to say an object has just been uploaded into that S3 bucket, or an object has been downloaded in that S3 bucket. So that is what I've done. I may not be able to show you that in full practice, but let me go and upload an object and download object from my bucket so I can see if I can show some of that to you. So let's upload a few objects. So I'll upload a few objects. So let's go to 1, 2, and 3. So I'm uploading 3 objects and I'll go ahead and I'll click on upload. And if I go to close, that closes it. And so I have 3 more objects that I've uploaded. So what I can also do is I can download a sample object. So let's click on that object and I'll download it. So I'll click on that. So downloaded the object, so close. So give it a while. What should happen is I should receive an email that will say, this happened. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this. So I can see there's some questions in the chat window, so let me address that. So Aziz says, please, can we have these notes? I'm guessing, Aziz, by the notes you're talking about the demonstration that I just showed. So if that is the case, if that is what you're talking about, what I recommend that you do is that you follow the community's Medium publication, because what I'll do is I'll publish the information for this demonstration that I showed you today. So this demonstration relating to this, I'll publish that demonstration, and how you can reproduce it, I'll publish it in the Medium publication. So just follow that. I'll try to get on as soon as possible. Just follow that and I'll publish it there. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Any other questions? Because what will happen is that we're going to pick this up from next week, I think. But next week, we're going to be treating test questions. So make sure that you study up a little bit on CloudWatch. Make sure you study up a little bit on CloudTrail, on SNS before the session next week, because we're going to be testing our knowledge. So if there's no question from anyone, I think that we're just going to call it a day today. So thanks very much for joining us today. Again, remember to follow the community's meetup page. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like this video if you're watching the video. Also, remember to follow the community's Medium publication. We are working very hard with AWS in the back end to make sure that we can get exam vouchers to community members to be able to do the security certification. So make sure that you're joined in on Meetup, on Medium, so that you get notified if that is successful and we're able to get vouchers from AWS. So, but for now, that will be it for today. Thanks very much for joining us for today, and we'll see you next time. Have a lovely evening, have a lovely afternoon, everyone. So see you and bye for now. Oh, we have Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank, you're missed today, but good to see you. Good to see you. Cheers. Bye, everyone. Have a nice time.